My beloved pet, my faithful companion, was called an inconvenience by my own son, who planned to take him away from me. Ethan's words echoed in my mind, each syllable a hammer striking my already fragile heart. I, Eleanor Vance, a woman who dedicated her life to raising a son with love and sacrifice, never imagined that the most excruciating pain would come from his own actions. Buddy, my 8-year-old golden retriever, was more than just a pet. He was my shadow, my confidant, the constant warmth by my side since my husband David passed away 5 years ago. The thought of losing him was an agonizing nightmare, an open wound that refused to heal. On that Tuesday morning, the sun streamed through the window of my Maplewood, New Jersey home, but the light couldn't dispel the darkness that had settled in my soul. Ethan, my only son, had visited me over the weekend and during dinner dropped the bomb. "Mom, Buddy's getting old. He's an inconvenience. Maybe it's time to think about a senior home for him." The coldness in his voice, the way he dehumanized my Buddy, left me breathless. He didn't see the sparkle in Buddy's eyes, the way he greeted me at the door, the silent comfort he offered on my lonely nights. For Ethan, Buddy was just a problem, an obstacle in some plan I still didn't understand. I felt a searing pain, betrayal consuming me. How could the son I loved unconditionally be so cruel? My heart ached with every memory of Ethan's disapproving look at Buddy, his sarcastic comments about the fur on the sofa, about the occasional barks. I tried to ignore it, to justify it, but the truth was something was very wrong. That wasn't my Ethan, the boy who grew up playing with dogs in the backyard. He was a stranger driven by a hidden agenda. But what Ethan didn't know was that by a strange premonition, or perhaps just by the growing feeling that something was amiss, I had installed small security cameras in strategic points around the house. Initially, it was to monitor the cleaning company, or maybe to keep an eye on Buddy when I went to the grocery store. Never in my darkest thoughts did I imagine that these silent lenses would not only record his actions, but would unravel a web of intentions that chilled my blood. What was exposed was something far more sinister. If you've ever felt the pain of betrayal, if a pet is part of your family, or if you believe that justice always finds a way, leave your like and subscribe to the channel. Eleanor and Buddy's story is just beginning, and what the cameras revealed will shock you. Life without David, my late husband, had been a void that seemed insurmountable. He was the anchor of our family, the pillar of strength and joy. When cancer took him 5 years ago, I felt a part of me went with him. It was into this abyss of grief that Buddy, a golden retriever puppy with melancholic eyes and a tail that wagged with contagious hope, entered my life. Ethan at the time was still living at home, a recent graduate in finance from Rutgers University, and it was he who brought me Buddy. "Mom, you need a friend," he said with a tenderness that now seemed a distant memory. Buddy became my purpose, the reason to get out of bed every morning. Our days were filled with long walks in the local park in Maplewood, where Buddy greeted every child and every other dog with the same effusive joy. He would wait for me at the door when I returned from the grocery store, with a toy in his mouth and his tail wagging so hard it seemed it would fly off. On cold winter nights, he would curl up at my feet as I read, his warmth and soft breathing the only sound breaking the silence of the house. Buddy asked for nothing more than love and a good belly rub, and in return, he gave me unconditional love that filled every crack in my broken heart. I made sacrifices for Buddy, of course. I replaced my Persian rug with a more fur-resistant one, bought a state-of-the-art vacuum cleaner, and adjusted my routine to ensure he received the attention and care he deserved. He was part of my family, as essential as the air I breathed. Ethan, on the other hand, had moved to an apartment in Manhattan 3 years ago, pursuing an ambitious career in the financial market. Our visits became sporadic, And when he did come, the tension between him and Buddy was palpable. At first, I attributed Ethan's irritation to work stress, to the hectic city life. "He's just tired, Buddy," I would whisper to the dog, stroking his ears. But the truth was, Ethan was changing. The affectionate boy who brought me Buddy had transformed into a cold, calculating man, obsessed with money and status. He talked about investments, about the stock market, about how life in New Jersey was slow and pointless. I tried to understand, tried to connect with him, but it seemed we were speaking different languages. With each visit, the comments about Buddy became more incisive, more disrespectful. "Mom, don't you think you're spending too much on this dog? Think about your future, your retirement." Or, "He's barking too much. The neighbors must be complaining." I always defended him, explaining that Buddy was a well-behaved dog, that the expenses were minimal compared to the joy he brought me. But Ethan didn't listen. His eyes, once full of tenderness, now carried a glint of impatience, and, what frightened me most, a certain disdain. I was blinded by a mother's love, unable to see the true extent of the darkness growing within my own son. The tension between Ethan and Buddy escalated alarmingly in recent weeks. It was no longer just passive-aggressive comments. Ethan's actions became more direct and disturbing. I remember one Saturday when he came for lunch. Buddy, as always, ran to greet him, wagging his tail enthusiastically. Ethan, instead of returning the affection, pushed him away with his foot, muttering something about fleas and hygiene. My heart sank, but before I could reprimand him, he changed the subject, asking about my finances with an almost predatory interest. On another occasion, I found Buddy's water bowl empty and his food scattered across the kitchen floor as if it had been kicked. Ethan had been the last to leave. When I confronted him, he merely shrugged. "Oh, Mom, the dog must have knocked it over. He's clumsy, you know." The excuse sounded hollow, and a shiver ran down my spine. I started noticing small details. Buddy seemed more withdrawn when Ethan was around. His barks, once joyful, were now more of an anxious whimper. He would hide under the table, something he never did. That's when the idea of the cameras came to me, not out of distrust of Ethan, but out of a general concern for security. The neighborhood, though quiet, had had a few minor incidents. Besides, I wanted to make sure Buddy was okay when I went out for my gardening classes at the Maplewood Community Center. I hired a security technician, a young man named Alex, who discreetly installed 3 small wireless cameras, one in the living room, one in the kitchen, and one in the main hallway. He assured me they were imperceptible and that I could access them from my tablet. For the first week, the recording showed only the peaceful routine of the house, Buddy sleeping on the sofa, me watering my plants, the cleaning lady doing her work. But then Ethan paid a surprise visit. I was out visiting my friend Sarah in Springfield. When I returned home and reviewed the footage, what I saw left a knot in my stomach. Ethan entered the house, looked around, and seeing Buddy approach, he didn't push him. Instead, he petted him, but with an expression of disgust on his face, as if he were touching something filthy. Then he went to the kitchen, picked up Buddy's food bowl, and emptied it into the trash, filling it with tap water. Buddy, confused, tried to eat, but there was nothing. Ethan just laughed, a dry, joyless laugh. That wasn't an inconvenience or clumsiness, it was calculated malice, but what disturbed me most was what he did next. Ethan approached the bookshelf where I kept our family photo albums. He picked up David's album, my late husband's, and flipped through it with an expression of contempt. Then he took out a photo of David and my mother, tore it in half, and threw it on the floor. That had nothing to do with Buddy. That was personal, and it was just the beginning. What else was he hiding? My hands trembled as I watched, horrified what my cameras had revealed. The surface of betrayal had been scratched, and what lay beneath was far darker than I could have imagined. The silence that followed my revelation was deafening. Ethan's forced smile crumbled, and Tiffany's face, previously so calculating, turned pale, her eyes wide with shock. Mr. Henderson, oblivious to the tension, continued to flip through his clipboard, muttering about the excellent location. I held up the tablet, the recording of their conversation echoing in the room, Ethan's voice, cold and greedy, detailing the plan to get rid of Buddy and manipulate me. "No, that's not what you're thinking, Mom," Ethan stammered, trying to regain his composure. It's a misunderstanding. Tiffany and I were just joking." Tiffany beside him nodded frantically, her fake smile reappearing, but now trembling at the corners. "Yes, Eleanor, it was a joke. A bad joke, I admit, but just a joke." I laughed, but it was a bitter, humorless laugh. A joke. You were planning to kidnap my dog, my companion, to force me to sell my house, my home, and you call that a joke?" My eyes fixed on Ethan, and I saw fear begin to settle in his gaze. "Do you think I'm a foolish old woman, Ethan? That I wouldn't notice what you were doing? That I wouldn't fight for what's mine?" Mr. Henderson, finally realizing the gravity of the situation, cleared his throat. I think I should go. I have another appointment." He quickly retreated, leaving Ethan and Tiffany alone to face the storm they themselves had created. "Mom, please, let's talk," Ethan said, his voice now pleading. "I can explain. I was under pressure. The stock market, I made some bad investments. I needed money." The confession, though belated, was a bitter relief. Greed was the driving force behind it all. "And what does that have to do with Buddy?" I asked, my voice still firm. "What does my dog have to do with your bad investments? And what does that have to do with tearing up the photo of your father and my mother?" The mention of the photo made him flinch. I don't know, Mom. I was angry at everything, angry at not having what I wanted, angry that you had all this and didn't want to help me." The raw, painful truth finally came out. He didn't see me as a mother. He saw me as an obstacle, a resource to be exploited. Tiffany, who had been silent until then, tried to intervene. "Eleanor, we can sort this out. We can forget all about this. Ethan will apologize and We will not, Tiffany," I cut her off, my voice filled with authority. "You are an accomplice to a plan to manipulate and rob an elderly woman, and that, my dear, is a crime." I took out my cell phone and dialed the police. Ethan and Tiffany looked at me in horror. "Mom, no. Please, I'm your son." "You stopped being my son the moment you planned to destroy me for money, Ethan," I replied, tears finally streaming down my face. But they weren't tears of sadness. They were of pain and righteous anger. "You called me an inconvenience. You called Buddy a problem. But the real problem here is you, and your actions will have consequences." The police arrived within minutes. I showed them the recordings, explained Ethan and Tiffany's plan. They were led away in handcuffs, their faces pale and full of despair. Buddy, who had been hiding under the table, slowly emerged, and I hugged him with all my strength. He was my family, my faithful companion, and I had protected him. The pain of betrayal was still there, but the feeling of justice, of having fought and won, was infinitely greater. The cameras not only revealed their actions, but uncovered a web of intentions that chilled my blood. What was exposed was something far more sinister, and now the truth was laid bare. The police siren fading away took with it not only Ethan and Tiffany, but also an immense weight from my chest. The silence that followed was different from the silence of grief I knew. It was a silence of relief, of justice being served. Buddy, still trembling slightly, nestled at my feet, and I stroked him, feeling the soft texture of his fur as a tangible reminder of what I had protected. The house, once a stage for a silent drama, now seemed to breathe again. The days that followed were a whirlwind of depositions, meetings with lawyers, and unwanted media attention. the story of a son who tried to manipulate his elderly mother to sell her house and get rid of her dog, all for greed, quickly spread through Maplewood and beyond. Journalists knocked on my door, but I stood firm, refusing interviews. My priority was to process the trauma and ensure that Ethan and Tiffany faced the consequences of their actions. My lawyer, Dr. Miller, an experienced and compassionate man from Newark, was a pillar of support. He explained that the camera recordings, along with my testimony and others, were irrefutable evidence of manipulation, attempted extortion, and, in Tiffany's case, complicity. The attempted kidnapping of Buddy, though not carried out, was a serious aggravating factor. Dr. Miller also informed me that Ethan had confessed his disastrous stock market investments, which had led him into deep debt. He saw the sale of the house as the only way out of his financial problems, and manipulating Buddy was just a means to that end. News of Ethan and Tiffany's arrest shocked the community. Friends and neighbors came to offer support, bringing food, flowers, and words of comfort. My friend Sarah from Springfield spent days with me, helping me organize the house and deal with my emotions. She reminded me that a mother's love, though unconditional, also needs boundaries, and that protecting myself and Buddy was an act of self-love. Buddy, for his part, was my greatest therapist. He didn't ask questions. He didn't judge me. He simply offered his warm presence, his loyal gaze, and his joyful barks when I needed a reminder that life went on. Our daily walks in Maplewood Park became even more meaningful. Every falling leaf, every ray of sunshine filtering through the trees was a reminder of life's beauty and resilience. I began to see the house not as an asset to be exploited, but as a sanctuary, a refuge of peace and love. The pain of Ethan's betrayal was still an open wound, but with each passing day, it healed a little more. I was learning to forgive, not for him, but for myself. Forgiveness didn't mean forgetting or accepting what he did, but rather freeing myself from the weight of resentment. I was rebuilding my life brick by brick with Buddy by my side, and for the first time in a long time, I felt that the future, though uncertain, was full of possibilities. The complication had been resolved, but the journey to redemption was still ongoing. 5 years have passed since that fateful day when the cameras revealed Ethan's sinister plan. The house in Maplewood, New Jersey, now flourishes with life and color, a testament to resilience and the power of love. The garden, once a mere lawn, had transformed into a vibrant oasis with colorful roses, lavender, and a small vegetable patch that produced the freshest greens. I, Eleanor Vance, was no longer the lonely, manipulated widow. I was a woman who had found new purpose, new strength. Buddy, now 13 years old, was still my inseparable companion. His steps were a little slower, his fur a little grayer, but his loyal gaze and his tail wagging with the same joy as always were proof that time had not diminished his spirit. He was my shadow, my confidant, the constant warmth by my side. My life had expanded in ways I never imagined. My passion for gardening led me to open a small landscaping business, Eleanor's Green Oasis, which thrived in the community. I also became an active voice in animal rights advocacy, using my story to raise awareness about the importance of protecting our four-legged companions. As for Ethan, news was sporadic. He had served his sentence and, according to Dr. Miller, was trying to rebuild his life in another city. I didn't seek him out, and he didn't seek me out. The wound of betrayal was still there, but it had healed, leaving a scar that reminded me of the hardest lesson life taught me, that love, even maternal love, needs boundaries, and that true family is built on trust and mutual respect, not on greed and manipulation. Tiffany, for her part, disappeared from my life. I learned, through others, that she had lost her job and moved out of state. Justice, in its own way, had reached everyone. Looking back, I realized that the worst situations can sometimes lead us to the best discoveries. The pain of Ethan's betrayal forced me to look inward to find the strength I didn't know I possessed. The cameras, which initially brought me so much pain, were the instrument of my liberation, revealing a sinister plan that, in the end, allowed me to protect my beloved buddy and myself. I learned that true wealth is not in material possessions, but in the bonds of love and loyalty we build. I learned that family is not just about blood, but about who chooses to stay, who chooses to love, who chooses to protect. And above all, I learned that the resilience of the human spirit and the unconditional love of an animal can heal the deepest wounds. If you were moved by Eleanor and Buddy's story, if you believe in the power of justice and the strength of love, leave your like, share this video, and subscribe to the channel for more soul-touching stories. And tell me in the comments, what was the biggest lesson you learned about family and loyalty?